Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. As I told you last week, I'm going to change the routine just a little bit. This is a chapel lesson that I used because I love the little story. I love the meaning to it. Supposedly the little story took place in East Tennessee a long time ago. An unwed mother that had a little boy. And the little boy, through no fault of his own, was brought into a world that they questioned a kid that didn't have a daddy and didn't know who his daddy was. And they pretty much ostracized this child from the time he was a little bitty thing. He found out real quick he didn't fit in. They said that on Saturdays they would go to the market in the little town and said that he would go shopping for the things that they needed, and said that people would whisper, but not whisper where you couldn't hear you, whisper where you could hear what they were saying. And it always had to do with his parentage and who his daddy was, and wondered who it was. And well, the child grew up and went to school. So when he got to school, he didn't go out to recess. Nobody played with him, because the parents had told him that child was to blame. It's his fault. He's somehow bad because of the situation of his mother. He didn't go to the lunchroom. He sat in the room because nobody would sit with him at lunch. And that went on, and down the road was a new preacher that came to town. He had kind of a new approach, not a new gospel, not a new doctrine, but a new way to approach life. And it talked about love, and he talked about taking care of each other, and talked about the importance of people. And to a little guy like Ben, it was a really big deal. Well, the story goes that he wanted to go hear this preacher. He'd heard so much about him. So he kind of worked up this routine. What he would do is he'd wait till after church started. He'd sneak in at the back, and he'd sit and listen and just drink in this affirmation, I'll get all fancy here, about that he was important, because he wasn't getting it anywhere else out in the little community. And said he loved to come, and he went again and again and again. Well, one Sunday, said he snuck in and said, the little guy just drinking in the sermon. He was loving it. And he let the time slip up. And instead of sneaking out, they amened on him. And you know how it is when you get stuck out in the aisle, especially in a little church, where somebody gets to talking with, cousin so-and-so and uncle so-and-so and whatever. And he got trapped. And he couldn't get out. Didn't matter where he turned. And he was just kind of desperate. And he's looking around, and they're not paying any attention to him, so he's good. He didn't realize it, but the little preacher had snuck up behind him. And he felt this hand on his shoulder. So he turned around, and there's the preacher. And the preacher looks down at him, and he says, "Whose boy are you? Who's your daddy?" Ben was just, the thing that he feared the most was happening right there in church. Well, by this time, no offense, Scott, preachers' voices carry. Teachers have the same problem. His voice carried, and when he asked, "Whose boy are you?" the place just went quiet. And they all turned around, and they all stared, and they all looked, because they wanted to know who his daddy was. Because they'd been whispering and talking about it for years. And he was just, I. Said the preacher looks at him, and he says, I know, I can tell. The resemblance is remarkable. You are a child of God. Big grin on his face. And he says, Now, go out and live a life that's worthy of that name. And I've always loved that little story. You are a child of God. The little lesson part of it, I saw this. I'm not hate to illustrate a story with a little story. There was a bad riptide at this beach, and the young man got caught. And the man literally risked his life to save him. Came back to shore, and the rescuers came and helped the young man. And later on, the young man that had his life saved went to his rescuer. He says, "Thank you for saving my life." And the man looked in the boy's eyes and says, "It's okay, kid. Just make sure your life was worth saving." Well, in 1 Peter chapter 2, 9 and 10, it says we are a chosen people. In some versions, it says a peculiar people. I'm a word person. Peku is part of that word peculiar. It means cattle or livestock. We're God's special possession. If you want to put it in just literal terms, we belong to God's flock. You know, the Lord is my shepherd. It says, now you're the people of God. Titus 2 and 14 says, make us a people he can be proud of. The NIV says that are his very own. And one version says people who belong only to them, zealous of good works and always want to do good. That there should be a difference in Exodus chapter 33. I've always loved this little story. God's upset with Israel because they've fouled up. And basically tells Moses, okay, you go your way, I'll go my way. We'll just part company. And Moses asked God, if you don't go with us, these people and I will be no different than any other people on earth. If there's no difference between us, Christians, and them, not Christians, well, aren't we kind of losing the point? There should be a difference in how we act and how we react. I'll finish up with a little thing that, again, little things that smaller kids can sometimes understand that maybe like me, and that all of you older folks that are more mature, but maybe you can get it too, because this is on my level. There was two little poor kids at Christmas that were staring in the store window. They're in just raggedy clothes, and they're just looking in at the toys. And you remember when they used to have store windows at Christmas time, and there were just trains, and it was just like, oh, it was just great. Lady saw them staring up in there. She talked to them. And she said, what are you getting for Christmas? We don't have Christmas at our house. What are you eating for Christmas? Well, it's just whatever we have there in the house. The lady took them in the store, and she bought them clothes, and she bought them Christmas presents, and she took them and she bought groceries at the grocery store and took them to their house. So now they've got presents, they've got things that they need, they've got clothes, they got food in the house. And as they were walking out, the little kids looked up at this lady and says, "Lady, are you God?" She laughed. She says, "No." She says, I'm one of God's children. Well, I knew there had to be some relation. So when people see us, do they think we're related to God? So just a little thought. It just, like I said, through the years I did these, and I just thought, well, I like doing them anyway, so I hope you do. All right, lesson. We are talking about as somebody said last week, the fourth court, huh? Yes, the fourth court. All right. Hey, guys, can you move the arrow? There we go. Thank y'all. They take care of me. Listen. Okay, Ezra and Nehemiah, that's the books we're going to be talking about this quarter. Okay, just real quick, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. This little lesson is called Setting the Scene for these books. Okay, let's begin with what we had. Babylonia, big country, took Judah, little country, and sent them into exile. Then Persia, another big country, defeated Babylonia and allows the return of Judah back home. Okay, we call this the post-exilic time. Okay, there's the exile, the return from the exile. So these are the books. We talked about Daniel and Ezekiel were the exilic prophets during the exile. Okay, you're here. You know why you're here. But God's going to let you go home. The return, we talked about these minor prophets, these shorter prophets that are called the post-exilic, after the exile. And the book of Esther, right in the middle of Ezra, from chapter 6 to chapter 7, there's about a 60-year gap. Esther happened in the middle of Ezra. Say that fast. Then the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, so how did we get there? So this is what this lesson's about. Again, which is do a little Bible review. No, I'm not going to beat it to death, but just reminding us, patriarchal age, a family that came to Israel and whose lives God's blessed. Abraham, the patriarchs. Then Joshua. God's people became rulers over the land of Israel. Now, they became rulers over the land of Israel, but they were harassed by powerful foes around them. Now, these are some of the things when we did the World of the Bible thing, we told them the ites, that there were people all around them. Back up. The Phoenicians were up in Tyre and Sidon, where Lebanon is today. They were harassed by them, by Aram, by Syria, King Hiram. Then the Ammonites, then the Moabites, family connections, the Edomites, the Amalekites, or the Amalekites, that seems to be the new word of choice. The Philistines, they were along the coast there. And then the Canaanites that lived amongst them. And they were harassed by all these powerful foes. And then God would send up somebody to defeat them, and then they would go back into sin. Then they got kings. They were ruled by kings who dealt with some of these foes. Now, if you go there, the Phoenicians, they made an alliance with them. They made ships and so forth. We talked about the ships of Tarshish. Aram and Syria, that was the kind of a back and forth deal. The Ammonites, they controlled. The Moabites, they controlled. The Edomites, they controlled. The Amalekites, they controlled. The Philistines, they controlled most of this time. And the Canaanites, they controlled. The city of Jerusalem was ruled by them. They called this little group called the Jebusites, and they kicked them out. And they took Jerusalem to be their city. And during this time, Israel reached its largest size. Okay. After that, after the United Kings, they divided into two kingdoms, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and then a whole series of kings. One's on the left, a few good ones, and some bad eggs. The ones on the right, as somebody says, not a good one in the bunch. And if you've been going here a while, we did a series on those kings, and there were lessons from Israel. Israel was still dealt with local foes. However, they dealt with what I call regional empires, powerful empires. The reality was, Israel is of great importance spiritually to us. It's of great importance strategically. It's on the road down to Egypt and up into Europe and over to Asia. It is strategically by its location. However, in simple terms, it's a small, militarily weak nation. There's Judah. If you look, little big Judah, there's Israel there, and that's the southern part of Israel. It's not a powerful nation. Okay, there it is right there. And again, we're talking about the southern part of that. Okay, we want to get into just remind you of just reality. There's Israel. It's about like New Jersey. Alabama is about 6 times bigger than Israel. I mean, the whole country of Israel would be about 1/6 the size of Alabama. Belize, not a big country, is it? Brother Gann was there, and it's a small country, El Salvador, and then if you look, it's a little bitty right there in Central America. One's to the north on the Caribbean side, and one's to the Pacific side. It's one of the smallest nations in Asia. It's not a big country. Now, if you remember when they invaded Kuwait, If you see the Persian Gulf over to the right, that little bitty country up at the end of it, there's Kuwait. That's about the size of Israel. Now, it's a little more round. Israel's a little more long and skinny. It's a small fish in a big pond. Okay, so for most of Israel's history as a monarchy, Israel was chased around by bigger fish in the area. Now, as we've said, countries like Phoenicia and Syria, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Amalekites, the Philistines, and so forth. Basically, we've talked about this before. I'll be loyal and pay whatever you ask if you just won't conquer me and wipe me off the face of the world. Okay, and to be honest, sometimes Israel was the big fish living in the area. The old, I think I talked about it. Sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug. Well, sometimes they were the windshield. Countries like Phoenicia and Syria and Ammon and Moab, all of those countries like that, Israel controlled them at times. And basically, they told them the same thing. I'll be loyal and pay whatever you ask. 100,000 rams, I think, is in one time with Moab. But later on in their history, Israel was chased by the biggest fish in the world at that time. There are two big fish in the world, Assyria and Babylonia. They were the powerhouses of that part of the world. And basically, these two giants pounded on each other. Sometimes Babylonia was in charge, sometimes Assyria, and they went back and forth. And literally, it reminded me of this. This is what they did. And they just kept pounding like a big heavyweight fight. However, the two giants pounded on the little fish, and they demanded tribute. They demanded money. They demanded whatever they asked. Pay up the kid and his lunch. And so the big kid, the bully, picks on the little kid going to lunch, and he wants his lunch money or his milk money or whatever your story has. Pay up or else. Remember, Israel's a small fish. Assyria and Babylonia, they're the big fish. Please don't eat me. If you want to put it in simple terms. Well, only if you're loyal and ask and pay whatever I ask you. Well, I'll be loyal and pay whatever you ask. Israel says this to Assyria. Judah says this to Babylonia. This was their deals that they made. Again, pay up or else. Judah had their own bully to deal with. Pay up or else. Or else what? Or else I'll send you into exile. Back in Assyria or back in Babylonia. Now, we talked about exile as being sent away because of political reasons. Now, exile in the Bible is Israel or Judah being sent or kept away to Assyria and Babylonia for not being loyal and or not paying up. What could save these little fish from these big fish? Well, all along, there's the answer. God says, I can save you from them if you're faithful to me. Judah was supposed to trust in God to defend them from the bullies. But they kept doing that. How can we do it instead of how can he do it? But they didn't trust in God. However, God told them, if you're not faithful to me, I'm going to let these bullies teach you a lesson. I'm going to let these bullies take you from Judah or take you from Israel over to here in modern day Iraq and Iran. Babylonian exile. Jeremiah says, the Lord has sent the prophets to you again and again. This is what's going to happen. You didn't listen. You didn't listen. You didn't listen to me and Jeremiah. You have brought harm to yourself. This is the harm. This is the exile. This is what the Old Testament all kind of revolves around. After you get out of the patriarchal age and you got the Ten Commandments, they're saying, okay, this is what will teach you a lesson. You didn't start trusting in God instead of bullies. So I'm going to let these bullies teach you a lesson. I'm going to let these big fish get you and take you into what we call exile. Now, during the same time where he's trying to talk to him, he sent these men, these prophets. These are the ones we call the pre-exilic prophets, before the exile. Okay, unless you change, we're giving you a chance. We'll let you change. And they're the ones Most of them came before the exile. And they reminded them of God's words about the exile. I can save you from them, but you got to be faithful to me. That's what God said, and that's what they were sent to see this message. So God sent the prophets to warn them about this exile's coming. If you don't straighten up and fly right, that's what my mama said. I never could fly, but apparently I didn't fly right sometimes. What these pre-exilic prophets say to the people, what he said, they just repeated, and they were a conduit for God's words. Judah will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. It's going to happen to you. I put this up here because sometimes we read that and we can just go, what? Okay, that's a 1954 Ford Police Interceptor. It's a 2024 Ford Police Interceptor. It's a lot different. Things change in 70 years. To a human concept of time, it's a long time. In the historical stretch of time, it's not a long span. But it says, this is the time. The Lord sent these prophets to you again and again. And these prophets sometimes were mistreated. We have stories of what they did to the prophets. They were sometimes killed. But Judah kept ignoring the prophets. You would think the people would listen to them. You'd think the people would listen to him. But no. I've spoken, but you haven't listened. Now, I guess that's biblically. We don't say that. They don't have that in the King James. But that's why we would understand it. You haven't listened. Talk to the hand, prophets. We're not going to listen to you. This is kind of what Israel and Judah did. You know, kind of stuck their fingers in their ear like a kid. Blah, 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 blah. They made fun of God's prophets. Elisha. They ridiculed them. Until finally, you didn't listen to me. You brought harm to yourself. You didn't start trusting in God instead of bullies. I'm going to let these bullies teach you a lesson. And they didn't listen to the prophet's words, and they didn't listen to God's words, and they didn't trust God. So the big fish came to collect, depending on which part of Israel. I told you I would. And the big fish, Assyria, sent Israel, the northern kingdom, into exile. As we said, it never came back as an organized group. As far as Judah, God said, I'll soon send for King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. That's in Jeremiah. He led a mighty empire, big fish, that bullied people and demanded they pay. Or else. I'll soon send for Babylon against Judah and against the people of Judah. And the Babylonians took Judah into captivity, or bondage, or exile, or whatever you want to call it. Because you can hear it by the same name. So I don't want that. Well, it said bondage. It's the same thing. They were a long way from home. And the big fish from Babylon came to Judah. So after Babylonia attacks. So this is what happened. They come in here and destroyed, in 587 BC, they destroyed Jerusalem. And this is part of the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. They destroyed the temple. They destroyed Jerusalem, the city, burned it. They destroyed the city walls. Part of the story of Ezra and Nehemiah is rebuilding the temple. They rebuilt the city, had to rebuild the walls, and rebuild the people. It's been a long time. Now, they went into exile. Told you, you're going to send you to exile. And they took them there away. And Judah was taken into captivity, bondage, exile. I'm a visual person. Sometimes if you read it, it's there. Sometimes if you picture old people, young people, there's the city being destroyed, and you're walking away, and you look back, I'm sure, and see that city you love destroyed. Mistreatment. They're captives in a foreign land. Psalm 137, by the rivers in Babylon we cried. We sat and we cried when we remembered Jerusalem. You know, you don't miss the water till the well runs dry, do you? You know, last night the power went out, you know, for a couple of hours. If you're normal, you went around the corner and flipped on the light, didn't you? I did. I went looking for a flashlight and I turned on the light. Okay, so this tells you the caliber of my mind. But I love this picture right here. This verse you hear in the devotional song is the deer pants for streams of water, my soul pants for you, God. Now that they can't have the temple, and now that they can't go over there, now they start going, man, we sure miss it. I want to go home so bad as that deer wants water in the desert. I want more than anything to be in the courtyards of the Lord's temple. My whole being wants to be there. I want to be back to the way it was. But they were in exile. Babylonia took the best and the brightest and took them to Babylonia. Now, they left the rest and the not brightest back in Judah to make money. These are the ones that sometimes they would send these other people in there and they intermarried, and you ended up with Samaritans, with the people, the interbred, mixed bred people. During this same time, God sent another group of people to teach and remind them, okay, you're here. You know why, but you get to go home. These are Daniel and Ezekiel. And they said, okay, they took you from home. You're here. You're going to be here for 70 years. Now, how do you live during this time? Settle down. This is the paraphrase version. Settle down, build houses, plant gardens, marry, have kids, have grandkids. 70 years. 70 years. And next month I'll be 69. So close to 70. Okay, there's been me. There's been my kids. Now I got grandkids. So he's saying that's what you want. That's what you need to do. Be productive. Be peaceful. Pray for Babylon. Oh, no. Yeah, that's what it said. Because if Babylon prospers, you'll prosper too. If they're invaded and terrible things happen, it'll happen to you too. Time passed us in exile. I remember when I was I'll say young. I'm not going to say I was ever real little. But now I'm not. Prophet told Judah after 70 years, and by the way, these were written before the exile, I'm going to let you go home. God made him a promise. Jeremiah 25, I'll let you go back. I'll keep my promise to you. How? Well, who is strong enough to defeat the mightiest empire in the world? Well, back to the prophecies. Prophet told Judah a nation would rise up. Jeremiah says, the Lord says, I'll stir up the spirit of a destroyer against Babylon. Who's the destroyer? Told them that too. Isaiah says, the Lord says this to Cyrus, the king that the Lord has chosen to serve him. By the way, this is the head of the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, if you want to be real historically there. Lord said to Cyrus, you're my shepherd. You'll do what I want. You think you're doing what you want, but you're doing what I want. I hold your right hand. I give you power. He says, I'll give you power. So I'll let you know, this is a spoiler alert. He's the one that takes care of Babylon. He says, I'll give you power, like the power to defeat the mightiest empire in the world. Now, let me explain something. The mightiest empire in the world is weak against the mighty arm of God. You know, we saw that picture of Babylon. Yeah, look over on the left. That's Babylon. God's mighty arm. Just no contest. Just no contest. How are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? Well, Babylon is the bully. It's the mightiest empire in the world. Heard a story, I've told it many a time when I was teaching middle school, because there's kids that are bigger or whatever, smarter or whatever they are, and they kind of want to kind of push around the little ones. What happened to the 8th grade bully? They'd sit there and look at you. Oh, no. Ran into the 9th grade bully. So what happened to Babylonian, the bully? He ran into a bigger bully than they were. And that was the Persian Empire. I'll raise up Cyrus, and he'll set my exiles free. This is what those prophets said. It's what Daniel and Ezekiel said. 70 years? You going home? No. Yep, going home. God said. Just a couple of little things we said last week. Babylonia's king of the hill. Judah was under their thumb. Either the exiles or the ones back home, the rest and not brightest, they were there. But they were all under the thumb of Babylonian. Persia defeats them. I'll raise up Cyrus in my righteousness, a destroyer against Babylon. Persia is now king of the hill. Persia let some of Judah go back. He'll set my exiles free. God said, I'm going to do it. I promise you I'll do it. That's how Judah goes back home. Judah's no longer under their thumb. You can go home. Now, he gave them a choice. You know, we talked about some of them, like Esther, Mordecai, chose to stay. But they said, if you want to go. And when you see the first part of Ezra, it talks about the ones that choose to go and the ones that choose to stay. But you know, it's that whole thing about if you have the choice, there's just something about being able to. You may not do it, but you can. It's kind of like I knew a friend of mine, and he sat up there and he said, well, I've turned 62, and I may not retire, but if I want to, I can. And this is kind of the same thing they were. This move back to Judah wasn't a piece of cake. It was kind of a whole lot more than just loading up the U-Haul and going back. There were 3 waves or groups who were sent from exile in Babylonia back to Judah. And over 90 years passed from the first wave to the third wave. You know, we read the text. It's real hard sometimes when you look at something and you read a simple sentence and time passes in that sentence. You know, I had a stomach virus for a week, but it's over. Whoa, that was easy. Not when you're in there at the white throne, and you're sitting at the white throne, or you're bowing down in front of the white throne. Don't tell me that week passed easy. And when you're sitting there going, I think I'll eat a cracker. Maybe. 90 years passed. It's a long time. A lot of water under the bridge. Lots of stuff happened in that 100 years that was written in Ezra and Nehemiah. So this is what this lesson's going to be. This is what this series is going to be. This is what this quarter is going to be. It's going to be about more depth in Ezra and Nehemiah. So I wanted to kind of set the scene for what we're doing. If you want to read Ezra, the first chapter, that's what we're going to be starting with next week. We'll talk about Ezra. The 3 things. We talked about destroying the temple. Zerubbabel rebuilt the temple. Ezra rebuilt the people. He was a priest. Nehemiah rebuilt the walls. Now, Zerubbabel, the governor, all of those people, the city was rebuilt in the time. As a matter of fact, some of the prophets got upset about it because they spent more time rebuilding the city than. But all of that, we'll get into all of that. Now, we got through a minute early, and that's fine. It's kind of hard to always know exactly how to slide on that time. But I wanted to make sure I set the scene for what we're going to do. So, you got 5 extra minutes. Enjoy a visit.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.